Mr. Biafra was drafted to be the Green Party nominee for the New York presidential primaries. Mr. Biafra is the former lead singer, songwriter of the political punk band Dead Kennedys. And a renowned spoken word artist and social commentator. Biafra was instrumental in increasing interest among youth in the Green Party. Mr. Biafra has chosen Mumia Abu Jamal to be his vice presidential running mate. This is very relevant to everyone in this country, and especially to those of us in Texas who watch helplessly while Governor Bush executes a man or woman a week. Mr. Biafra ran against Dianne Feinstein in 1979 in San Francisco, forcing a runoff. In June of 1986, criminal charges for distribution of harmful matter to minors against Dead Kennedys' Frankenchrist album thrust Biafra into the spotlight as a spokesperson on First Amendment rights. It marked the first case in history to try a recorded work for obscenity. He's recently been sued by former band members for refusing to allow a Dead Kennedys song to be used in a Levi's TV commercial. I give you Jello Biafra.
Thanks a lot. Imagine my surprise when I woke up in January and found that I'd been nominated for president by the New York State Green Party. I figured I could leave my name in not as an opponent of other candidates, but to augment other candidacies and draw in people familiar with me and what I've stood for the past 2 decades into the party and the presidential election and local elections this fall. Because if Seattle last fall and April this year in Washington, D.C. isn't enough proof of just how wide the disaffection with our one-party state masquerading as a two-party state really is, I mean, how desperate is it when people are willing to elect a professional wrestler governor? I mean, more and more people are questioning whether it's more important to live in a marketplace instead of a community. And questioning whether competitiveness is more important than compassion and quality of life. Overall, I'm told that people ages 18 to 24 still vote less than any other age group in this country, but I don't think that's going to last very long, in large part thanks to us. More and more people of all ages are seeing corporations as an authority figure to rebel against instead of buying into every manufactured pop trend. I tell anybody pointing Generation X or slacker fingers at anybody, look at United Students Against Sweatshops. Students allied to reform corporations. Corporations are the critical mass issue now that Vietnam and civil rights and the environment and feminism were in the 60s and early 70s. Critical mass is forming, and in not a moment too soon. We don't even have capitalism in these countries, except for the little people. We have feudalism now. New feudalism, the new corporate feudalist world order, and disenchantment with that is growing far beyond just Seattle or DC or campuses or the Green Party. It's much deeper than that. So let's call the big picture the Green Wedge, shall we? The Green Wedge. Why am I green? Why did I register green years ago? Because the Green Party seems like the best electoral arm of the Green Wedge. I'm down with both direct action and electoral action. We need both. If you don't sit down and be quiet, I'll never get through here. So I'll just say that I support the Green key values. Both parties' platforms I am down with. So rather than use up the rest of my time to preach to the choir, I'd like to offer a few additions and food for thought to enhance these platforms, hopefully. Number one, people at large are really frightened when we call for limiting income or a maximum wage, which is one of my favorite parts of the platform. Bill Maher on Politically Incorrect even introduced me as crazy before he said my name, but at least I got maximum wage debated on national television. How do we sell, I hate to use that word, sell maximum wage to a public who's frightened of the big bad government giving more taxes on us? Payback in the form of health care accessible to all, improved and free schools all the way up through the adult continuing education level, public works projects long overdue that are in the platform, etc. And to further reach youth especially, in addition to education reform, amnesty on all student loans. Let's call the drug war what it is. Ethnic cleansing American style. Long term, our goal is not just decriminalization of hemp, but decriminalization of all common recreational drugs like they've done in some European countries, so the hardcore addicts get it on prescription so they don't have to rob people and pay the mob's high drug prices. Crime will go down. More education reform. A mandatory class at the early high school level on one of the most important things we're all supposed to learn, and it's not taught in school at all, parenting. Election of police officers by the districts they patrol. In addition to aid for small farmers and organic farmers, if the soil needs a rest, why not put up panels and be solar farmers and wind power farmers? Use NASA and our lovely military to go up in space and bring back every corroding nuclear satellite and bring it back to Earth and take it apart before it crashes and poisons us with radiation. And imagine my surprise when I found out there's not one but two Green parties right now, and they don't always seem to get along. One Green Party. One Green Party. This election is too important to let past personal disagreements and disagreements on minutiae imprison our future. We have momentum right now. Let's use it. And when we gain that momentum, we're going to get more and more finger wagging, especially from the Democrats saying we are spoilers. No, The real spoilers are people like Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Tipper Gore, Dianne Feinstein, Gray Davis, and others who've sold the Democratic Party's best principles down the river to corporations. So by all means, let's spoil some more. And don't hate the media, become the media. The wedge issue you can use to communicate to family, people at work, people at school who are just as upset as we are, but maybe falling for Rush Limbaugh or Pat Buchanan. Why can't I put food on the table? It's not the welfare cheat's fault, it's Wall Street's fault. So on that note, I came up with a little chant and rallying cry. Let's see what you think of this. Repeat after me. Can't put food on the table? Join the Green Wedge. Equal opportunity for all people. Join the Green Wedge. Human rights for all people. Join the Green Wedge. Save our planet and restore it now. Join the Green Wedge. Sick of paying taxes for war? Join the Green Wedge. No WTO. Join the Green Wedge. Health care and a home. Join the Green Wedge. Take back power and vote. Join the Green Wedge. If not us, who? Join the Green Wedge. If not now, when? Join the Green Wedge. Don't give up. Thanks. You passed up Clinton's State of the Union address for this? I got here slightly late, so I saw some of it. And boy, was it a breath of fresh air to get back to reality in here. Not to mention seeing the turnout. I didn't know whether anybody was going to show up to this thing. And when I got here, there was still a line around the block. Clinton was going on and on about how never has the American economy been doing so well. Never has there been so few people living in poverty. Never. And I was going, oh my God. And he was proudly, and our welfare rolls are cut in half. And where are they living now, Mr. Bill? I just sort of got madder and madder and madder and knew it was best that I leave. And he was so convincing at it, too. I mean, he says great things sometimes. It's just a shame he does the exact opposite when nobody's looking. You know, what better, more persuasive person to enact the Reagan-Bush agenda once they get removed? That's sort of what he was designed for, I suppose. And I better clarify the part about the New York primary. Somebody at the Green Party's convention there nominated me. And so I'm sort of running against Ralph Nader against my will in a way. But I figured, what the hell, if it'll draw more people out of the woodwork to show up and vote, why not? I mean, I voted for Ralph last time. I've been registered Green for many years. I'll gladly vote for him again. The reason is I want to ask people, like I've been doing at my shows since everything in Seattle went down, is how many of you really understand what the WTO is and how it does its dirty work? Everybody who has a grasp on that, raise their hand. I have a feeling it's still a minority of the people in the crowd who are raising their hands. Am I correct? I mean, within 5 days or a week of Seattle, I did one of my shows at Fort Lewis College in Durango and asked how many people understood what the WTO really is and what it does. 3 people out of about 400 or 500 raised their hands. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're still up against, so I think it might not hurt to give a little bit of a crash course in exactly what the WTO is. To go back a little bit, let's start with the NAFTA Treaty, North American Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, a Reagan-Bush wet dream enacted by the Clintonoids. Notice how the pattern keeps repeating itself as the drug war budget goes up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, how they defined free trade was, which is not a bad concept in itself, but this isn't free trade, this is managed trade, kind of like managed health care, corporate managed health care, where it was supposed to be a big boost to Mexico, but instead it meant stripping down our environmental laws, lowering everything to the lowest common denominator, whereby all of a sudden DDT, that horrid pesticide, may be illegal in this country, but it's okay to dump it on crops in Mexico and truck them into this country and sell them at King Soopers and Safeway. And it has meant that many, many, many jobs have been shut down over here and exported to Mexico and other third world countries where people are doing work in virtual slave labor conditions. And even for those people whose jobs are left, it's a great tool now that corporations have in this country to say, oh, so you want a cost of living raise, huh? So you want to keep your union, huh? You still want your medical benefits? Well, unless you cut your wages by a third or maybe more and give up your benefits and say bye-bye to the union, we're moving the factory to Mexico and you don't have a job anymore. In other words, it's initiated sort of a race to the bottom. It's had a devastating effect on Canada, too, with many, many places shut down there and American products imported instead, many people losing their jobs. And even in Mexico, NAFTA has had a very negative effect. Real income has gone further down the toilet. And many, many indigenous farmers who have grown their own food and taken food to market for hundreds and hundreds of years can't compete with the truckloads of genetically modified corn rolling by on the roads. And so economic refugees of NAFTA are now leaving their ancestral lands and winding up homeless in Mexico City or Guadalajara or Tijuana or whatever, thanks to so-called free trade. So soon after NAFTA came in, the big brother of NAFTA, as I understand it, is the revision of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT Treaty, which was in place before. And when it was rewritten, yes, another Reagan-Bush wet dream come to life through the Clintonoids. The new GATT Treaty, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is how it works, created the World Trade Organization originally as a way to hear disputes. What kind of disputes? Well, this is where the machinery that people are protesting in Seattle and other places comes into play. Any country that signs the GATT Treaty can challenge any other country who signed the GATT Treaty's laws by complaining to the World Trade Organization that a particular law, often democratically enacted from clear across the ocean, is a barrier to free trade. And the way these are decided, by the way, is in secret. A panel of 3 agribusiness and chemical company executives usually meets in secret in Geneva, Switzerland, and the country under attack is not allowed to present a defense. All the documents are classified, and the rulings are kept as quiet as possible. Very first WTO ruling was against our Clean Air Act. And I remember how long and hard the fight was to get that thing enacted in the first place when we were up against the Nixon administration and all. And basically how that worked was Brazil and Venezuela complained to the WTO that it was a barrier to free trade that they couldn't export dirty gasoline up here. And if you've ever been to Rio or Sao Paulo or Caracas or Maracaibo, let alone Mexico City, you know what dirty gas can do to the air, and they want to be able to do it everywhere. And I don't think this was a poor, impoverished, third world country trying to stand up for their rights. It was somebody doing the dirty work of a American or European-owned oil companies, using a third world country as a front. Soon after that, Mexico went after us to the WTO for the dolphin safe tuna law that took years and years of activism to get through, whereby you couldn't sell tuna fish in this country that were caught in those giant gill nets that can stretch for up to 50 miles at times. And they don't just catch tuna, they catch all kinds of other life in the ocean as well, thus putting several species of dolphins on the endangered list now, and there used to be plenty of them, and there was the angle Greenpeace could use to get the law enacted. Oh my God, they're killing Flipper. Well, it worked until the WTO said, no, 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 you have to reduce your environmental consciousness to the level of the corrupt government of Mexico and the corporations that pay for its existence. So Al Gore, that noted environmentalist, came up with a solution. Keep the dolphin safe labels on the cans, but let the gillnet tuna in anyway. And the way the Clintonoids handled the WTO's ruling against our Clean Air Act, by the way, was to quietly agree not to enforce it anymore. That's how the WTO works. So meanwhile, our government has gone to the WTO, as some of you may know, to try and wipe out European and Japanese laws against genetically engineered frankenfood. And so far, the European Union has refused to comply with the WTO's ruling, resulting in billions of dollars of tariffs and sanctions against their independent farmers, courtesy of us. That's why the farmers over there are so mad, and why genetically engineered frankenfood has been a big issue over there, as has the WTO for quite some time now. Maybe we didn't hear about it over here until Seattle, but over there it was already big news, to the point where people are pulling up the genetically engineered crops in France. The farmer you saw from France in the film with the mustache and all, the reason he was so well known is because he decided he was mad as hell, wasn't going to take it anymore, and went down and destroyed a McDonald's. And in several other places in France, disgruntled farmers have been taking their rotting crops by the truckload and dumping them in front of McDonald's. While meanwhile, in Scotland, people have been pulling up the genetically modified, or I say genetically mutilated crops, and have been arrested and are going to be tried under anti-terrorism laws enacted against the Irish Republican Army. And instead of trying somebody for bombing someplace in Northern Ireland, oh, you hurt some frankenplant, we're going to put you away for a long time. Tony Blair, who's even worse than Clinton, is way, way down with this, by the way. Guess who, of all people, has put up an anti-frankenfood website, by the way? Prince Charles. Never thought I'd hear the day I'd say this, but let's hear it for Prince Charles. Blair, meanwhile, has ordered, not asked, ordered Charles to take it down, because royals aren't supposed to dabble in politics, and Charles has refused. So I get this vision of Charles in his polo outfit riding into battle against Monsanto. Anyway, the money addicts at the top, who can't think of anything better to do than to plot and scheme ways to make more money. I mean, that's one of the best things about the Green Party platform, I think, is a maximum wage. I mean, after a certain point, when you have enough money that you're living comfortably, people just get more and more obsessed with making more and more and more money, and if you hurt somebody else, hey, that must mean I win. It's like an addiction after that. And I think wealth addicts are far more dangerous to the world than drug addicts, personally. Thus, the maximum wage. It's like crack or heroin. Nothing is enough. You have to have more, more, more. Not even the WTO bulldozing democratic laws into the water is enough. No, we have to have more. So they were in the process of putting together another treaty on top of GATT called the MAI, Multilateral Agreement on Investments. Oh, good. Perhaps you have heard of it. This one would basically give corporations the same power as sovereign nations to challenge other countries' laws to the WTO for interfering with their right to profit. And among the things in the MAI that were considered interference with right to profit were environmental laws, minimum wage laws, labor safety laws, subsidies to indigenous farmers and local businesses, laws about how many radio stations and media one entity can own in one area and keeping that local. Then on top of that, there was even a provision in there where you could go sue the country for hundreds of zillions of dollars if the country failed to quell civil unrest against the corporation. And there wasn't a lot of publicity about MAI over here. It was in some good publications, and Ralph Nader's group Public Citizen kept the pot boiling on there. In Europe, more people found out about it and got a lot angrier a lot quicker. Negotiations for the MAI, by the way, were kept secret until somebody leaked it onto the internet in France. There was enough heat on that one that about a year ago, December 98, negotiations for the MAI were scuttled. Solid proof that grassroots uprisings, even by mail and by phone and by the net, can work. So, part of the purpose of the WTO's meeting in Seattle was to see how much of the MAI they could fold into the GATT treaty as amendments without anybody looking. And that didn't happen, thankfully. But this doesn't mean that all of a sudden, we kicked ass on the WTO, we beat them in Seattle, we won. Wrong. They're still there. There's still undoubtedly some communication going on behind the scenes on how to implement more of their wealth addict plantation agenda behind our backs. It isn't even capitalism anymore. What they're trying to enforce and implant and entrench is, let's face it, it's feudalism. That's what it is new feudalism, corporate feudalism. You remember feudalism, barons and lords in the high castles, while the peasants on the other side of the moat work the land in fear and hope they can feed their families and not have the knights stick a spear in them or something. Well, current feudalism is basically, every time we buy anything from Shell or Microsoft or Warner Brothers or Walmart or Safeway or whatever, we are their serfs. And the only way to completely divorce ourselves from corporate feudalism altogether, well, I can think of only one person, pure and politically correct as the driven snow, who's ever pulled that off. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Not everybody wants to wind up like Ted Kaczynski, do we? He paid quite a price for his art statement, didn't he? In a cabin in the woods with one window, getting more and more miserable for 20 years, so mad he's sending bombs in the mail to people he doesn't even know because he can't get laid. There's got to be a better way. So, I think we'll fold this into two things. After the WTO, what now? And more to the point, how to get back at corporate feudalism. Well, there is many step-by-step things we can do without waiting for the next big event in Seattle or whatever, is just saying no to corporate feudalism. Give them as little of your money as possible. Do not shop at chain music stores, chain bookstores, chain clothing stores, chain Frankenfood grocery stores. Support the local businesses who might even know you by name and give a damn about the quality of what they're selling. Isn't there a proposal before the Boulder City Council now to kick all chains out of the mall? If they vote it down, get your petitions together, get it on the ballot for the fall, and vote it in as a ballot initiative. And if that goes through, like the protests in Seattle, that is going to be a shot heard round the world, that a town actually kicked the chains out, or at least out of the mall. Aside from not giving these clowns your money, I mean, as hard as it is to find meaningful work that'll actually pay the bills in this day and age, try not to work for them. Don't give them your talent or your intelligence, but if you must work for them, at least remember that the computer age has ushered in a whole new frontier of sabotage on the job. Thought you'd like that. Even voting is very, very important, because even if you don't have, I mean, what choice is there when you've got like King George II, Prince Albert, or Bill Bradley? That's not a choice, no. But don't let that discourage you from voting. I mean, the local elections are where it's at. When you show up and vote, you can influence who's on the city council, who's on the school board, who goes to the state legislature. Plus, when you show up and vote, it means you can get ballot initiatives passed that legislators and governors are too chicken shit to do themselves. How else would medical marijuana ever have gotten through than by showing up and voting? How else does rent control or living wage laws ever get through unless people like us show up to vote? Because if we don't, well, does the name Drew Clark ring a bell? It's Drew somebody who became a state legislator from part of this town and county who was a total right-wing fundamentalist Christian, because other people didn't show up to stop him. And he was a stealth candidate, a Christian coalition stealth candidate who knocked off State Senator Stan Johnson because nobody showed up to vote in the primary. And then there he was. And when we don't show up, they can put people like that on the school board. There was a fundamentalist who snuck onto the school board when I was at Boulder High, and I was in a play where that school board member made a male put his shirt back on in one scene because it was obscene for a guy to have his shirt off. He got voted out too, but he was sitting there for 4 years on the school board. We have to show up and vote. And don't be intimidated by people who tell you that, say, if you choose to vote for the New Party or the Labor Party or, yay, the Green Party, it doesn't mean you're playing a spoiler and letting somebody bad get in, because if people didn't vote Green, all those people would automatically vote Democrat. Wrong. A lot of people who vote for alternative parties otherwise don't vote at all, number one. And number two, the purpose of people like the Green Party is to gain enough of a wedge in the voting so that people like Democrats have to listen to us instead of turning into Clinton and Gore clones and sucking up to the WTO. In the '94 election, the Democrats who broke with Clinton and voted against gutting the welfare system and came out and admitted, yeah, I want to control guns, yeah, I want to stop the drug war, yeah, I want to keep assisting people who are poor, they won. It was the mealy-mouthed millionaires that the Clinton people were running who lost. And every time there seems to be some sort of viable alternative running against the Republicrats, or the corporate party, I suppose we should call them, people do come out of the woodwork to vote for them. I mean, some of the same people who voted for George Wallace in '68 voted for Jesse Jackson in '88, and then for Perot in '92. That is how wide the discontent is, which brings me to the next point. Don't hate the media, and don't just support the media, become the media. Not just supporting underground zines and the independent media coalition and the people who made what you saw tonight. Part of what becoming the media means is going one-on-one with people you know who may not always agree with you, who you don't usually would like to talk about this stuff to. People in your family, at work, at school, whatever. Communicate with them why this is important, how it affects their lives, and that voting for Bill Bradley is not going to solve the problem, let alone when you got somebody spouting Rush Limbaugh bullshit. Of course, the urge is to say, oh, get away from me, but there's also opportunity there, because anybody who falls for that is as upset as we are, and chances are it's about the exact same stuff. They've just been misled. The bottom line issue that affects all kinds of people that everybody's concerned about is putting food on the table. It's getting harder and harder to put food on the table because housing cost is going up, costs of transportation and everything else is going up, and it's not because of eco-terrorists or feminazis or immigrants or Japanese. No, it's because we're letting our country be looted by robber barons because we keep voting in Democrats thinking they're going to solve the problem when they're not. One-on-one, becoming the media. Be communicative about it too. Telling somebody they're a redneck or they're stupid or whatever is not going to get through. I mean, Michael Moore, you all know who Michael Moore is, right? Roger and Me, TV Nation. He takes this a step further, saying people on our side are so used to talking only to each other that we're completely out of touch with everybody else. Therefore, we should all go line dancing. I'm not sure I want to go line dancing to prove his point, but I agree with what he's trying to say, the same thing. We have to reach out to people who are on our side and don't know it. And that was one of the best things about what went down in Seattle. Here was people who would normally be derided as tree huggers marching side by side with people they would normally put down as rednecks or hard hats or Archie Bunkers or whatever. That whole stereotype and miscommunication was broken down and people were working together. That's very, very important. Not even in the protests against the Vietnam War were a lot of those people on the same side. I mean, there was all these battles between demonstrators and so-called hard hats, and this time it's the so-called hard hats getting screwed just as bad by the upward flow of money, courtesy of the WTO and the agenda of the people who put it there. But this sort of continuing communication also means as you go out and fight and try to turn people on to all these different issues, be careful about becoming a fundamentalist about it, too. That turns people off just as much as trying to sell them a Bible at the airport or whatever. I've seen so many people who are for about 6 months are really, really hardcore anarchist, squat, veganism, blah, 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 and everybody else is fucked. And then about 6 months to 2 years later, something's cramping their style and they're getting miserable. But because they see things in black and white, fundamentalist terms, they see no alternative but to go completely the other direction. I've seen this happen so many times. The guitarist in one of the major anarchist activist punk bands in the 80s, when that band broke up, went back to LA, got a computer job, and bought a BMW. It doesn't have to be that way. If you don't go so far over this way, and maybe only go as far as a ethical and moral code and lifestyle you can actually live with and live up to, you're less likely to turn into an SUV parasite 2 years later. And this applies far off in the future, too, especially those of you who are going to become parents. Don't forget who you are, why you feel this way right now, and how it affects what you do with your life. And one of the great disappointments for me going through the 60s as a very open-eyed child, and then when I came of age, it was the horrible, disappointing 70s when it kind of all petered out and all that energy that stopped the Vietnam War kind of ended and people didn't keep it going. Well, now, people my age, I'm 41 now, a lot of the people, even people I grew up with, they have no tangible memory of Vietnam or even Watergate at all. It didn't happen. It didn't exist. And I think part of the reason for that was their parents, to protect them from the big bad world, whenever Vietnam or insurrection in the streets or whatever came on the TV, they changed the channel to something nicer. Don't hide reality from your kids. You will have smarter kids down the line if you tell them what's going on. My parents told me, explained to me when I was real little what the Vietnam War was, why people were getting hosed in Alabama because they were black, why Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were cool, and everything else. So at a very early age, rather than shutting me out, it was ingrained in me very early why war was wrong, why racism was wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't hide that stuff from your kids. Explain it to your kids instead. So, back to Seattle. Couple things on that. Number one thing to take out to people, there was no riot there. Within a day, it was riot, riot, riot all over the news. The corporate media edited things down to the kids who were smashing the window of Starbucks. That wasn't a riot. That was kids smashing a window. And granted, it was a very poor tactic to present to the world, and as much as I was giggling inside, they got Starbucks, it's still, you can't present that to the world if you want to get your point across. People, rather than just chanting no violence, should have just grabbed them and said, hey, back off, no violence, and stopped them, instead of waiting for the police to. And ironically, a lot of those people who smashed the windows turned out to be homeless kids who lived across the freeway up in a Seattle neighborhood called Capitol Hill. And yeah, some of them had come up from Oregon, but a lot of them were just homeless kids who were mad at the whole world. Nobody wants to be homeless when they're a kid or at any other time. They're mad as hell. It was interesting that except for one jewelry store, all the windows they got were from corporate chains. But again, that's not a good it's just like the weathermen in the 60s giving the SDS a bad name when they got real violent and started throwing bombs to protest the war, and sure enough, a lot of them turned out to be undercover FBI agents, etc. Don't let that happen to us. So it's not just all grim struggle against the cops and the fascist pigs. There was plenty of camaraderie, love, music, and partying to be had, which is what resistance should be. Don't let the fundamentalists on the left tell you it's always got to be a grim struggle and, what we're going to do about it, God damn it, we're going to have meetings. Those people initially crowned themselves the leaders of the anti-Gulf War insurrection in San Francisco, where people were just walking out of offices during lunch hour and not coming back. It was amazing. But quickly people said, party! And it was like Mardi Gras all night. Non-violent. I hadn't seen people that friendly since the 49ers won their first Super Bowl. But it was not a grim struggle. It was a joyous celebration of people power. And there was enough of us in San Francisco, Boulder, and many towns big and small that no matter what Tom Brokaw and Ted Koppel and CNN said was going on, people knew, and more importantly, George Bush and Colin Powell knew that there was a huge backlash, and they cut that war off early. We stopped the Gulf War. But right now, the victories in Seattle were outing the WTO, brought a lot of people out of the woodwork with good energy, and a lot of different groups together who didn't know they were on the same side, let alone were willing to get along. Boy, is that important. But right now, that's as far as it's gotten. It's still advantage WTO. They have the money, they have the power, they have the guns, they have the organization. The same situation we faced when lonely voices in the wilderness started to say that maybe we should not be in the Vietnam War. And it was never a majority of Americans who were out in the streets protesting the Vietnam War. It was 3,000 to 5,000 committed activists and then others who showed up for the events. But in spite of the whole business and military machine being on the other side, we did stop the Vietnam War. And that is the type of battle we have ahead of us. It's going to be long, it's going to be hard, and it's going to come in waves. You know, there's going to be a critical mass event like Seattle, people are going to come out, then it's going to be out of the news, but we can't forget. Then another event and people come out, and then it dips backwards. This falls under a bigger umbrella in a way. It isn't just the WTO, but disenchantment with corporate feudalist rule is getting wider and wider and wider. So, step by step along the way, there will be police, there will be rubber bullets, but in the end, I think pushing the WTO back in its cage where it belongs and then tossing out the cage is a battle that can be won in our lifetime if we don't give up. Thanks a lot.
Dateline Hellburbia. Walmart Wasteland, USA. Monster teenagers shot up their school again today. What makes them do it? Video games? Marilyn Manson? For a live report in front of the now empty building, here's Clonetta Hairspray with all the exclusive blood-buttered details. What does make them do it? Well, it couldn't possibly have anything to do with parents, or the fact that school really does suck, and so does a horizon of sterile dead-end careers where you're chained to a keyboard 80 hours a week with only enough free time to go home, rent a video, and pass out on the couch. Till one day you wake up and resign yourself to being the same sort of failure that you hated about your parents. And there really is a mandated caste system where favored bullies of both sexes get patted on the head for hazing and beating up undesirables of the lower caste. I come to dissect teenage rampage superstars, not to praise them. But every time this happens, what gnaws inside and continues to fascinate is, this could have been me. Why not me? After all, wanting to destroy the school and annihilate the bullies is a normal rite of passage of growing up in America. Sure, I wanted to kill the quarterback and firebomb my gym teacher's office in 7th grade, but by 9th grade, the quarterback had chilled and I had chilled and we were more or less friends. Plus, I had no access to guns or so much money I could go out and buy them. But still, what made them do it? What made them actually go through with it? Doom? Marilyn Manson? Be serious. Millions of other people play Doom and don't run out and kill the school. Millions more check out genuinely bad things on the internet and don't turn into bad people. The two Columbine guys in Littleton, Colorado, were a month away from graduation, free at last after 12 long years, and never have to see all those people they hated again. Why? It makes no sense. If Manson was such a big influence, why didn't they wait 5 more days and go see his kick-ass live show in Denver? It makes no sense. That's like saying the very music that made some troubled kid happy is what led them to kill themselves. It makes no sense. I'm glad I didn't go to Columbine. I went to Boulder High School, about 20 miles north. Even then, Columbine had a reputation as a darkly conservative rich kids' school, possibly the wealthiest in the whole state. Sure wish my school could afford equipment to get class credit learning how to make videos. But what really creeped me out about Columbine was the impression that if you didn't fit in where you were supposed to fit in, you had nowhere to go but to join the anti-clique clique. Huh? At least at Boulder High, there was a large enough pool of mutants that creative degenerates like myself could have their fingers in several different pies, even a straight one or two. None went deep enough for me to feel a sense of acceptance or belonging, but deep down inside, I knew I was me. I was my own person. I liked that. There were reports that outcasts at Columbine, like at so many of today's schools, were punched in the head in the hallway as they went to class, pissed on in the showers by the jocks. Stuff like that would never have been tolerated at Boulder High. Sure, there were thugs, but they knew that no matter how rich or athletic you were, you could get expelled, or worse yet, kicked off the team if you did stuff like that. Contrast that with this quote from a 250-pound defensive lineman from Columbine High School. Columbine is a good, clean place except for those rejects. Most kids didn't want them there. They were into witchcraft. They were into voodoo dolls. Sure, we teased them, but what do you expect when kids come to school with weird hairdos? They're a bunch of homos. The whole school's disgusted with them. If you want to get rid of someone, interesting language, usually you tease them, so the whole school would call them homos, and when they did something sick, we'd tell them. Nowadays, schools too often do push sports over learning. Treat their jocks as coddled gods to prepare them for their destiny as knights of the business round table, to throw around their brute privilege as fiendishly competitive adults. Meanwhile, girls are beaten down and kept in line by schools, media, and parents alike. No matter who or what you are, you're fat, you're ugly, you're inadequate, your breasts are too small, your butt is too big, your butt is too small, your breasts are too big, worse yet, your brain is too big. And if you're not as thin and perfect as the plastic beautiful few, there must be something horribly wrong with you. So buy this, and buy this, and buy this, and buy this. A survey earlier that fateful year identified the Columbine student body as 60% evangelical Christian. A strain my uncle once called obnoxiously religious. I have no problem with people having spiritual values, but when anyone tries to force their spiritual values on others through monkeying with the law or intimidation or violence, I fight like a cat in a corner. What would Jesus do this? What would Jesus do that? Who cares what Jesus would do? This is the 21st century. I doubt the shooters at Columbine are the only ones who have rightly or wrongly felt seriously threatened by this. Being bullied to believe. is the strongest reason I know of not to let prayer back in public schools. Speaking of which, can you believe there's now not one but two sets of Columbine parents running around the country pimping their daughters' tragic deaths at huge religious revivals, saying theirs was the one who said she believed in Jesus Christ right before she got shot, while the official investigation showed that the girl who actually said that is very much alive and chose not to use that as a cash cow for God Incorporated. My sister's dead too. I know what grief can do, but let's cash in. Creepy. Other parents have allowed themselves to be hornswoggled by lawyers, suing the school, suing the sheriff, suing the other parents as though enriching, carpet-bagging litigation crocodiles will somehow bring them closure. In West Paducah, Kentucky, where a kid shot up the morning prayer circle, parents of 3 victims are not only suing the school district, but several teachers, various students, manufacturers and distributors of video games and movies, and what they call pornographic or anarchistic websites, and they're even suing the homeowner that the murder weapons were stolen from. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get real. There ain't no such thing as closure. All the lawsuits, religion, and happy drugs in the world are not going to reverse the fact that my sister and her husband, who I loved like a brother, were killed in a rock climbing accident in '96. No little magic closure is ever going to bring them back or make everything all better. The loss, the longing, that hollow feeling in my gut will never completely go away, nor should it. You deal with it and keep moving on. Closure doesn't exist, so don't ever let anybody try to sell it to you when you're hurting. The creepiest school shooting rampage to me is still the one in Arkansas. 13 and 11-year-old boys, the 11-year-old supposedly the dominant one. Of course, a U.S. Senate committee led by that noted legislative titan Sam Brownback of Kansas and his sidekick and head of the Democratic Leadership Council, Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut, said music was once again at fault. They flew up one of the teachers from Jonesboro, claiming the older gun child was a fine boy till he started listening to that Tupac Shaker and Bone Thugs and Harmony. What she didn't mention was that he also sang in the church choir regularly, and that at age 13 and 11, those kids knew how to hotwire and drive a van, and that they learned how to shoot almost as soon as they could walk and knew right where to find Grandpa's guns when the big day came. They shot only girls and a female teacher. The older one said it was because one of the girls had jilted him by refusing to become his girlfriend on demand. Where did that come from? Sorry, Senator, but bigotry, sexism, and sharpshooters dressed like Rambo in their baby pictures, that doesn't come from music, that comes from parents. So ban black trench coats, that'll solve the problem. The Columbine shooters were not in the trench coat mafia or Marilyn Manson fans, by the way. And Lord, none of these terrible things would have happened if we just hung up the 10 Commandments in all the classrooms. So we can make everybody memorize thou shalt not kill before they graduate and join the Marines. And better yet, Now that they've finally come up with a book that kids are willing to quit playing video games in order to read because they like them so much, well, we've got to ban Harry Potter because it mentions witchcraft. Leave it to bonehead school officials and cops to overreact so far off the scale, so long as it avoids real problems and solutions. Instead of teaching tolerance, they are now promoting more intolerance. A woman I know who teaches in Fort Collins High School, further north of Columbine, said that on the day of the shooting, the administration called an emergency staff meeting, and one of the people there said, "We've got to start profiling those kids." So with Columbine as an excuse, open season on weirdos has begun. In Salt Lake City, a kid got kicked out of school for wearing a t-shirt that said vegan on it because it promoted gang activity. In Pennsylvania, a girl was suspended for saying out loud that she understood how someone who was teased mercilessly could snap. In Florida, a girl was suspended for bringing nail clippers to class, while another 16-year-old boy got booted for showing a miniature Confederate flag to his friend at lunch while they were discussing the Civil War. Since 1996, 20 students in 4 states have been suspended for possession of Alka-Seltzer. No matter how nauseating the curriculum, thou shalt not bring fizzies to class. Near Dallas, a 13-year-old spent 5 days in jail because of his Halloween essay that got extra credit for the teacher. Another got 3 days in jail in Wilmington, North Carolina, because he wrote "The end is near" on a computer backdrop, so they charged him with communicating a threat. And 2 10-year-olds were charged with a felony in Virginia, trying to injure or kill their teacher because they squirted soap gel in the teacher's water bottle. The counterattack on kids who think has gone from funny to fierce to downright dangerous and sick. Sam Donaldson quacking away about the coming onslaught of goth gangs had me rolling on the floor with laughter. Less funny, however, is the Crime Prevention Resource Center out of Fort Worth, Texas, group of cops and concerned citizens who tell school officials and parent groups that goths are as dangerous a gang as Crips and Bloods, and that any child caught listening to Marilyn Manson should be put in a mental hospital. More and more school kids are developing serious back and shoulder problems thanks to lockers being torn out, so they have to carry all their books with them everywhere they go, preferably in see-through backpacks. In DeSalle High School in New Orleans, they don't just drug test athletes, they cut off a lock of everybody's hair every year and test them all for drugs. Further still out in Looney Land is Odessa, Texas, where students at Permian High School are now surrounded by a giant security fence, surveillance cameras even on the school buses, and must all wear barcode badges around their necks at all times that can be scanned to show everything they've done wrong and their medical records. Regular drills include sealing the hallways where students must drop their belongings where they stand, and all the belongings are run through metal detectors. Live SWAT teams drill right in school in Pittsburgh and Chicago. And our government and the private security industry have found a way to get it on the game too. Straight from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, let's play Get the Geeks. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has unveiled their Mosaic 2000 program, where school officials can secretly vet and rate potential troublemakers on a scale of 1 to 10 and have the feds tell them if they should kick them out or lock them up. And Pinkerton, yes, that Pinkerton, when they're not busy shooting union activists in the earlier part of the century, Pinkerton offers cash prizes and t-shirts to kids who turn in their fellow students for being too weird under their WAVE program. Among the symptoms of dangerous behavior initially listed by Pinkerton are bad grades, little interest in school, and excessive feelings of isolation or rejection. This too could have been me. It was me. Time magazine has their How to Spot a Troubled Kid cover issue, and they list some handy guidelines on how to spot a depressed child: acting up in school, refusing to take part in school and family events, seeking out music, art and games and books with death-related themes, Saving Private Ryan, and feeling that their family, peers, and teachers disapprove of them. This is a medical disorder? It is now. While in preschoolers, times experts say to look for overactivity, sad appearance, irritability, and tendency to portray the world as bleak. And the answer, of course, is not more Sugar Bomb cereal for the overactivity before school, not more Pokemon. The answer is drugs. No, not the fun drugs, but overused, abused narcotics like Prozac, Ritalin, Paxil, Zoloft, Xanax, made and overpriced by the very multinational drug cartels, companies, that help finance the Just Say No commercials, that help drug our paranoid populace into tolerating the drug war. Have you drugged your kid today? According to ABC News, 7 million American school children are now doped up on meds, up from 100,000 only 20 years ago, pre-Reagan. Kids in America are 10 times more likely to be dosed with Ritalin in this country than they are in Europe, and twice as likely as Canada. There's enough examples just among people I know that I fear today's Ritalin kids are at risk of becoming tomorrow's speed freaks and junkies. But what if school really is boring? What if parents, teachers, and peers are stupid? Does that mean we should drug our best and brightest minds of the future into submission and stupidity just to get them to obey? Smart remark? Must be hyperactive. Bored with class? That's attention deficit disorder. We're drugging our kids so we don't have to talk to them, overscheduling them with stupid activities instead of asking what they really want to do, or worse yet, spending actual time together with them. You have your own TV and computer in your room. Now go away. And let's not forget those new SUVs and minivans with built-in drop-down television screens, so parents can sedate and ignore their kids without wasting a minute of precious cell phone time. Well, guess what? The shooter in Springfield, Oregon was on Ritalin and Prozac too, yet he heard voices and felt he couldn't make them stop. The one in Pearl, Mississippi was beaten by his brother and told by his mother that he was fat, stupid, lazy, and wouldn't amount to anything. He too reported hearing voices. The one in Kentucky had been branded gay in the school newspaper, then told by the administration that was no big deal. Guess it was to him. According to The Nation, the 13-year-old in Arkansas had been molested for the past 4 years. And the woman in South Carolina who barely escaped a death sentence for pushing her car into a lake and drowning her own children was repeatedly molested as a teenager by her stepfather, who no one suspected, let alone ever punished, because he was a respectable pillar of the community and head of the local Christian coalition. Nothing is more dangerous than someone who truly believes their life is destroyed and they have nothing left to live for and therefore nothing to lose. Who don't necessarily want to die but feel they have no choice. Who are pretty sure who screwed up their lives and figure, if I have to die, I'm taking them with me. This has been a brutal fact of ghetto life since time immemorial. But now that it's hit white suburbia, kids who don't buy into the game are all fair game. But no matter how much you profile and put up cameras and harass and ban music, some vacant stranger out there somewhere, raised on guns or raised on hate, mind-fucked by pedophile relatives, molested by Ritalin and Prozac, smothered by older brothers, successful siblings, and the pressure to be perfect, will find a way to be pop star for a day and will tune in and watch every time. The Columbine shooters thought there should be a movie about their lives, directed by Tarantino, or get this, Steven Spielberg. There's something very Ed Wood about that, if you ask me. And the hockey dad in Massachusetts who slammed someone else's dad's head into the locker room floor in front of the kids again and again until he was dead, what music did he listen to? And the online day trader in Atlanta who lost his shirt and gunned down his brokers, was he driven to kill by the influence of the Wall Street Journal? This could have been me. Why not me? Why not me? I do what I can to fill in the blanks for people who've only lived in the era of Reagan, Bush, Clinton greed, who never knew a time when corporations were supposed to obey the law, when government politicians weren't so brazenly corrupt, when there were actual differences between the Democrat and Republican Party, when there were actually people worth voting for and dreams worth believing in, when commercial radio didn't totally suck. When news media was independent and took their job seriously enough to report actual news, illuminating important things that were really going on and showed why they were important and affected people's lives. When we felt responsibility for people who were hurting and didn't turn our snouts and leave them begging in the street. When people come of age now, they see a horizon of greed, hate, corruption, pollution, of absentee parents, failed go, go, go lives, see no hope for finding meaningful work, no hope for being honestly and truly loved, no hope for lasting relationships with anyone or anything. Admire thrills instead of courage, because sooner or later, when you snoop behind the music, everyone you looked up to and respected turns out to suck anyway. Taught not to hope, or how small battles fighting for what you can change can build up to changing what it looks like you can't. How do we empower people to grow up unafraid to be their own person, and by sometimes painful, sometimes clumsy trial and error, find out and flesh out who they are? What's wrong with an identity? Let the bad seeds grow, and the drive and vision to break out and strike a nerve, and at least not be another dysfunctional robot. How I wish I could tell the people who snap, high school isn't that important, and it's not the best years in most people's lives, and in the long run, when you look back, it doesn't matter much anyway, does it? And the sooner you stand up and piss on its grave, Head into the dawn and get the hell out of town. Find and build your own world and really be your own person. Blunder into fellow mutants who see the same things you do and know there's something better somewhere out there when you make the effort to create it. The smaller, more laughable, and totally unimportant those golden teenage memories and rose-colored scars become.